this video, we dive into the movie Seventh Son, where we will explore the storyline, break down the plot, and take a closer look at the cast and characters. We will also discuss the film production detail and examine its box office performance. Finally, we will share our thoughts and personal reactions. So let's get started. When we begin talking about this movie, it is important to slow down and really consider why this film deserves discussion. At first glance, it may seem like just another fantasy adventure released during a time where the genre was already saturated with epic franchises and magical world. But sometimes the most interesting conservation come from film that attempt something ambitious even if they don't fully succeed. Let's start with the genre. Seventh Son firmly belong to the fantasy action category. It deals with witches, dark magic, and ancient prophecies and chosen hero, all classic fantasy element. By 2014, audience had already experienced massive fantasy successes like The Lord of the Ring and Harry Potter, which set extremely high standard for world building and storytelling. That's precisely why Seventh Son becomes worth discussing. It enters a competitive space trying to carve out its own identity with a darker tone and a more mature mythic atmosphere. The film does not aim for whimsical magic, instead it leans into grim landscape, shadowy forest and morally complex character. The idea of the seventh son is rooted in folklore, and that alone gives the movie an interesting thematic foundation. It suggests destiny, inherited power, and the burden of legacy. As a reviewer, I find that concept compelling because fantasy works best when it blends myth with human struggle. While the film may not fully explore its deeper theme, the potential embedded in the premise make it a worthy topic of analysis. Now, let's turn to the director, Sergei Bodrov. Bodrov is known for bringing a serious, often grounded tone to his storytelling. His background in international cinema gives Seventh Son a slightly different flavor compared to the typical Hollywood fantasy blockbuster. Instead of glossy optimism, there is a heavier, almost sober atmosphere. You can feel a certain weight in the pacing and visual design. Brodovo approaches the material with a mythic seriousness rather than playful adventure, which is an interesting creative decision. Brodovo, as a viewer warming up this discussion, I think the director influence is especially important because it shapes how we experience the fantasy world. The film does not feel light or comedic. It feels rugged, cold, and dangerous. That tonal choices alone separate it from more family-friendly fantasy film of its era. Whether that tonal shift work is debatable, but it certainly gives us something to talk about. Production style is another reason this movie deserves attention. Seventh Son is visually ambitious. The special effects are prominent, from shape shifting witches to fire breathing dragon and large scale battle sequence. The production design aimed to build a medieval world filled with texture, costumes, stone fortresses, and hunting landscape. Even critics who were disappointed by the narrative often acknowledge the effort put into visual spectacle. However, this also open an important discussion about style versus substance. The film had a large budget and leaned heavily on CGI and grand visuals. As viewer, we can ask, does visual scale compensate for weaker character development, or does the heavy reliance on effect make the emotional core feel distant? These are the kind of questions that make reviewing this movie interesting. Another production element worth noting is the casting, particularly the commanding presence of actors like Jeff Bridges, Julianna Moore. Their performance bring gravitas to the film even when the script struggles to provide depth. Watching experienced actor navigate a CGI heavy fantasy world add another layer to our conversation about performance with spectral driven cinema. So as we warm up this discussion, we can see that Seventh Son is worth examining not simply because it is a fantasy film, but because it represents a moment in Hollywood where studios were investing heavily in dark, effect driven adaptation of young adult literature. It seeks at the intersection of ambition and expectation, and sometimes there are more fascinating films to analyze not because they are perfect but because they try. This film had an estimated production budget of approximately $95 million, with some industry reports suggesting that the final cost may have reached closer to 100 to $110 million due to post production complexity and release delay. In neutral financial terms, this places the film in the mid to high budget range for fantasy adventure film of the early 2010. It was not a modest production by any standard, but it also did not reach the extreme financial scale of the largest franchise blockbuster of its time. When analyzing a production budget of this size, it is useful to consider how resources are typically allocated in a fantasy film. A significant portion of the budget would have directed a significant portion of the budget would have been directed toward visual effects. Seventh Son rely heavily on computer generated imagery for magical transformation, supernatural creator, large scale battle scene, and environmental enhancement. In genre production of this type, visual effect can account for 30% or more of the total cost. Because the film marketing emphasized spectacle, which is transforming into dragon, elaborate spell casting, and expansive fantasy landscape. It is reasonable to conclude that digital past production consume a substantial share of the budget. Cast compensation also likely representing a meaningful allocation of funds. The film features established actors such as Jeff Bridges and Julianna Moore. Hiring Academy Award winning or high profile performer typically increase upfront salary expenses. Through star power can also enhance international marketability. Mid careers and rising actors such as Ben Barons and Alicia Vikander would have required smaller but still notable compensation packages. In a film of this scale, above the line costs, including director, producer, and principal cast, often represent 20 to 40% of the total production budget. Another key expenditure category would have been physically production design, directed by Sergei Bodrov. The film aimed for grounded medieval aesthetic, required detailed costume, weaponry, creature, prosthetic, and constructed set. Even with heavy CGI integration, family fantasy still depend on tangible set piece and location shooting to create believable environment. Filming reportedly took place in multiple international locations with increased logistical costs such as transportation, crew accommodation, permits, and equipment movement. It is also important to consider the financial impact of production delay. Seventh Son experienced multiple release postponements, which can increase holding costs, extend post-production expenses, and require contract renegotiations. Delay must also affect marketing strategy, potentially require additional promotional spending closer to the final release date. When compared to the similar fantasy film of this era, Seventh Son's budget sit in an interesting middle tier. Major franchise entries such as the later Harry Potter film often carried budget exceeding $150 million, supported by established global audience. On the lower end, fantasy action hybrid like Hansel and Gretel, Witch Hunters were produced for roughly $50 million, representing a more controlled financial risk. Seventh Son at around $95 to $110 million fell between these extremes. These positioning meant it required a strong international performance to achieve profitability, especially consider that marketing costs are typically not included in the financial production figure. Industry convention suggests that a film often needs to earn approximately twice its production budget worldwide to break even once distribution fee and marketing expenses are included. With the production cost near $100 million, it would likely have needed global box office revenue in the range of 180 to $20 million to comfortably recoup its total investment. Its actual worldwide gross fell significantly below that threshold, making it financially underwhelming relative to its scale. From an analytical standpoint, the budget reflects ambition. The studio invested in visual spectacle, recognizable talent, and international production value. However, mid-range fantasy films face structural challenges. They require blockbuster level earning to justify high visual effects spending, yet they do not always benefit from built-in franchise loyalty. Seven's Son demonstrates how resource intensive fantasy filmmaking can be and how financial outcomes depend not only on production scale but also on audience reception and market competition. It firmly belongs to the dark fantasy and action adventure genre, but what makes it worth discussing is not simply its classification. It is the film attempt to balance mythic storytelling with blockbuster spectacle that define its identity. The movie draws from folklore tradition about witches, curses, and chosen heroes, yet it presents these elements through a modern, fact-driven cinematic lens. At its core, the genre is traditional high fantasy. The story unfolds in a medieval inspired world filled with supernatural forces and ancient prophecies and a battle between good and evil. There are monster hunter in enchanted bloodlines, shape shifting witches, and looming apocalyptic threats. However, unlike lighter fantasy adventure that emphasize wonder and discovery, Seven Sun leans into darker fantasy territory. The world is not colorful or whimsical, it feels harsh, cold, and dangerous. This darker approach aligns it more with grim fairy tales that family friendly magical escapism. Atmosphere play a central role in shaping the viewer experience. From the beginning scenes, the film establishes a brooding environment. Fog covered mountain, dimly lit castles, and shadowy forests dominate the visual palette. The production design favor muted earth tone, grey, brown, and deep blues rather than vibrant color. These stylistic choice reinforcing a sense of moral ambiguity and looming threat. Even movements that might traditionally feel triumphant are usually restrained, maintaining the film's sober mood. The tone is serious and at times solemn. Directed by Sergei Bodrov, the film avoid overt humor and instead emphasize tension and gravity. The central conflict between Spook and Mother Malkin is presented as an ancient, deeply personal rivalry. There is little light-hearted relief. Even training sequence carries an undertone of urgency rather than playfulness. This tonal decision shape how audience emotionally engage with the story. Rather than sleeping swept up in adventurous excitement, viewers are positioned inside a world that feel perpetually on the brink of destruction. Pacing is another important component of the film's mood. Seven Sun moves relatively quickly from one major event to another. The narrative structure prioritizes action sequence and confrontation over slow character development. While the beginning introduced the mythic premise, the film accelerates into a sequence of battle, escape, and magical encounter. This breaks pacing, sport its action adventure identity, but sometimes limit deeper exploration of character motivation. The rapid progression can create momentum, yet it also contributes to a sense that the world is sketched broadly rather than incrementally built. Stylistically, the movie relies heavily on visual effect, magical transformation, creature design, and large-scale destruction. Sequence dominate the screen. The stylistic emphasis on CGI spectacle shape the film emotional rhythm. Moments of tension are frequently expressed through visual intensity rather than dialogue or psychological notes. Fire, smoke, and kinetic camera movement are used to heighten urgency. This stylistic choice to prioritize spectacle align the film with contemporary blockbuster fantasy trend of 2010. Performance style also contribute to the overall mood. Jeff Bridges brings a rugged, almost world-weary presence to the role of the Spook. His portrayal reinforces the film's darker tone, emphasizing experience and burden rather than heroism and charisma. Opposite him, Julianna Moore play Mother Malkin with control menace. Her performance adds a layer of cold authority that enhances the film's ominous atmosphere. Their performance anchor the movie in seriousness, preventing it from drifting into self-aware fantasy exaggeration. Overall, the mood of this movie can be described as grim, tense, and visually imposing. It aimed to create a mythic, dangerous world rather than confronting magical escape. The atmosphere is consistently shadowed, the pacing emphasizes action over interception, and the tone remain heavy throughout. Whether this stylistic approach fully resonates with audience is open to debate, but the film commitment to dark fantasy identity is clear. It presents a world where magic is not delightful, it is threatening, volatile, and steeped in centuries of conflict. Before watching this film, audience expectations were shaped heavily by timing, genre trends, and the people involved in the project. By the early 2010, fantasy cinema had already gone through a major renaissance. Franchises like The Lord of the King and Harry Potter had redefined what audience believed fantasy film could achieve in terms of scale, emotional depth, and world building. So, when a new medieval fantasy film with witches, prophecies, and epic battle appear, viewers naturally approach it with certain assumption. From a demographic perspective, the film seemed positioned toward teenager and young adult. The story centered on a young chosen hero discovering hidden abilities and training under an experienced mentor. That structure closely mirrored many popular young adult adaptations of the era. Viewers in the 13 to 25 age range, especially those who grew up on fantasy novel and cinematic franchises, likely expecting a coming of age journey filled with emotional growth, moral dilemmas, and romantic tension. The presence of a young protagonist suggests relatability, while the darker tone hinted a slightly more mature storytelling than purely family oriented fantasy film. At the same time, older fantasy fans may have approached the movie differently. The involvement of the established actors such as Jeff Bridges and Julianna Moore likely signal a level of prestige. Their participation could have led some viewers to anticipate strong character-driven performances layered with the spectacle. Mature audience familiar with this actor's previous dramatic work might have expected emotional complexity and nose conflict, especially given the film's darker marketing tone. Genre fans in particularly carried specific expectation. Fantasy enthusiasts typically look for immersive world building, detailed lore, and coherent mythological system. The premise of the seventh son of a seventh son draw directly from folklore tradition, which can be deeply intriguing to viewers who participate myth-based storytelling. Before watching, many fans likely anticipated a richly developed magical hierarchy, clear rules about spells, creatures, and supernatural forces. In fantasy, consistency matter. Viewers want to understand the logic of the world, even if it is fantastical. There was also an expectation of visual spectacle. By 2014, audience had grown accustomed to large-scale CGI battle, dragon, and supernatural transformation. Marketing material emphasized fairy confrontation and shape-shifting witches, so many viewers probably enter the theater expecting visually impressive sequence. Fantasy of fans often value cinematic grandeur, the feeling of being transported to a fully realized alternate reality. The and special effect focus imply that the film would deliver on that front. However, expectations were not only shaped by genre, they were also influenced by marketing context. During that period, studios were adopting many young adult fantasy novels in hopes of launching the next long running franchise. As a result, some viewers may have accepted Seventh Son to the first installment in a broader cinematic universe. The structure, a mentor training a gifted apprentice against a powerful enemy, feels like the foundation for sequel. Audience often watch such film with an eye toward long-term storytelling arc. There may have been anticipation of layered character backstories and unresolved thread designed to continue into future chapter. Tone was another area where expectation play a role. The promotional material suggested a darker, grittier fantasy world rather than a light, family friendly adventure. This likely appealed to viewers who prefer serious take and emotionally ambiguous character. Dark fantasy fans often look for tension, danger, and emotional weight rather than comedic relief. Giving the brooding presence of Sergei Bodrov at the helm, some viewers may have anticipated a grounded, sober approach to mythic storytelling. In my opinion, audience expectations were ultimately a mix of hope and comparison. Many viewers probably entered with caution, optimism, hoping for a new fantasy saga that would capture the excitement of earlier franchise while offering its own identity. But comparison to established series were inevitable. Whenever a fantasy film presents a young hero, a wise mentor, and dark magical antagonist, audience instinctively measure it against the genre most successful example. So before watching, expectation likely center on three main ideas: immersive world building, compiling character relationship, and high quality visual spectacle. Whether the film met those expectations in a separate discussion. What's clear is that Seven Sons arrived carrying the weight of a genre that had already set very high standard, and viewer approach it with those standards firmly in mind. When analyzing the target audience for this film, it became clear that the film was designed with a specific type of viewers in mind, primarily those who enjoy dark fantasy adventure with strong visual spectacle and myth-based storytelling. The movie's tone, pacing, and marketing suggest a carefully defined demographic focus rather than a broad all ages family appeal. First, in terms of age group, the film appeared to target teenager and young adult roughly between the age of 13 and 25. The central character, Tom Ward, is a young man discovering his identity and hidden abilities. That coming of age structure is particularly appealing to adolescent and young viewers who often connect with stories about self discovery, destiny, and stepping into adulthood. The chosen one narrative has long resonated with the younger audience because it reflects themes of potential growth and empowerment. However, the darker tone and action intensity suggest that the movie is not aimed at very young children. The presence of violent confrontation, ominous speeches, and a grim medieval atmosphere position it closer to teen fantasy rather than family friendly fantasy. Parents looking for light-hearted magical adventure for children under 10 might find the mood too heavy. Instead, the film aligns more closely with early teen viewers who are beginning to move toward more mature cinematic experience. Beyond age interest play a significant role in defining the target audience. The movie is clearly made for viewers who are fascinated by mythology, folklore, and supernatural conflict. The concept of the seventh son draw directly from European legend, which appeal to audience who enjoy stories rooted in mythic tradition. Viewers interested in witches, curses, monster hunter, and medieval lore are the core demographic. Fantasy readers, especially those who grew up reading supernatural young adult novel, are likely to be naturally drawn to this premise. The film also catered to audience who prioritize visual effect and action sequence. Much of its appeal lies in spectral magical transformation, large scale battle, and creature driven confrontation. For viewers who enjoy cinematic grandeur and CGI heavy storytelling, Seventh Son offers continuous visual engagement. Action oriented fantasy fans who prefer fast pacing and frequent compact over slow political intrigue or complex philosophical theme would likely find it more satisfying. Genre preferences is perhaps the strongest defining factor. The film is aimed squarely at fans of dark fantasy and action adventure hybrid. It is not high fantasy in the epic layered sense of world building that one might find in the Lord of the Ring. Instead, it fit into the subgenre of darker monster hunting fantasy stories that focus on direct confrontation between human and supernatural threats. Viewers who enjoy movies about witches, demon hunters, and mystical warrior will likely feel most at home here. The casting choice also suggests an attempt to broaden the target audience slightly beyond teenager, with respected actors such as Jeff Bridges and Julianna Moore in major roles. The film may also appeal to adult viewers who follow these performer career. Their presence add credibility and could attract an older demographic that appreciates established talent even within genre filmmaking. Additionally, the directorial style of Sergei Bodrov leaned towards seriousness rather than comedy. This reinforces that the film is made for viewers who enjoy intense, sober storytelling rather than playful fantasy adventure. Audience seeking humor, light romance, or whimsical magic may not be the primary target. Instead, the movie seems tailored for those who prefer tension, looming danger, and a constant sense of threat. It is also worth noting that the film appears structured with franchise potential in mind that suggests a target audience willing to invest in a series rather than a single standalone experience. Teen and young adult viewers in particularly often spoil multi-film sagas and return for sequel if the world feel compelling enough. Overall, it is made for teenage and young adult viewers who enjoy dark fantasy, action-driven storytelling, and visually intense supernatural battle. It appeals most strongly to fans of myth-inspired narrative and monster hunting adventure, while older viewers may appreciate its cast and serious tone, and younger viewers may be drawn to its magical premise. Its core target audience remain those who prefer darker, spectral focused fantasy over light-hearted magical escapism. The emotional experience promised by this film is rooted in dark fantasy intensity rather than uplifting wonder. From its premise to its visual presentation, the film signal that viewers are stepping into a world defined by danger, prophecy, and looming supernatural conflict. It does not promise warmth or light-hearted escapism. Instead, it offers tension, urgency, and a steady sense of threat that shape the emotional journey from beginning to end. In terms of mood, the film establishes a brooding and sober atmosphere almost immediately. The landscape are cold and rugged, the lighting is muted, and the tone rarely shifts into comfort or playfulness. This creates an emotional environment built on suspense. Viewers are meant to feel that the world is unstable, that evil forces are always close to breaking one. The presence of an ancient witch antagonist reinforces that the sense of dread. The emotional promise here is not joy but anticipation, an ongoing awareness that something catastrophic could happen at any moment. The mood also carries a sense of inevitability. The concept of being the seventh son of a seventh son suggests destiny rather than choice. That theme shapes the emotional undertone of the story. Instead of celebrating freedom and exploration, the film leans into the burden of responsibility. The protagonist is also discovering magic for fun. He is stepping into the role that demands sacrifice and courage. For the viewer, this creates a mixture of anxiety and admiration. We are meant to feel the weight of what is at stake while also recognizing the bravery required to confront it. Theme of good versus evil are central to intended emotional impact. The conflict between Spook and the witch Mother Malkin is representing as an initiate and deeply personal. The long-standing rivalry creates emotional tension that goes beyond simple action. There is a sense of unfinished businesses of history repeating itself. The film promises viewers a dramatic confrontation between opposing forces that represent order and chaos. While the narrative structure is straightforward, the emotional framing encouraging viewers to invest in the stake of that battle. Another emotional thread running through the film is mentorship. The relationship between the young hero and his hardened teacher carries theme of trust, discipline, and legacy. The spook portrayed by Jeff Bridges embodies experience and caution. His world-weary presence contribute to the film's serious tone. For viewers, this dynamic creates a subtitle emotional arc. Watching a reluctant apprentice grow under strict guidance, it taps into universal feeling about learning from elder and stepping into adulthood. Fear is also a key emotional component. The witches and supernatural creatures are designed to intimidate rather than amused. Transformation, fairy destruction, and ominous encounter are meant to provoke tension. The film promises moments of shock and confrontation that keep viewers on edge. The mood rarely allows for extended calm, reinforcing the sense that safety is temporary. And for fans of dark fantasy, this continuous tension is the part of the appeal. At the same time, there is an undercurrent of romantic and emotional conflict. The presence of morally ambiguous female character introduces theme of trust and temptation. That element add complexity to the emotional experience rather than presenting a purely black and white moral universe. The film hints at shades of grey. This creates internal conflict for the protagonist and invite viewers to question loyalty and identity. Under the direction of Sergei Bodrov, the film avoids over sentimentality. The intended impact is more restrained and grounded. Emotional highs are often expressed through action rather than dialogue. Heavy conventional. The style suggests that courage is demonstrated through confrontation, not lengthy interception. This keeps the emotional tone consistent with the grim aesthetic of the world. Ultimately, the emotional experience promised by the Seventh Son is one of dark immersion. It aimed to make viewers feel tension, urgency, and the weight of destiny. The mood is heavy, the theme revolves around responsibility and sacrifice, and the intended impact is to leave the audience with a sense of having witnessed a mythic struggle rather than a light fantasy adventure. It is a film that seeks to engage through atmosphere and conflict, offering emotional intensity rather than emotional confront. At its core, this film revolves around an ancient enduring story concept, the tension between destiny and choice, beneath the surface of which is revolve around witches, battle, and supernatural spectre lies a narrative structure around inheritance of power, of responsibility, and of conflict. The film abstract foundation is built on the idea that certain individuals are born into roles by they neither fully understand nor initially seek, yet must eventually accept. One of the central themes is legacy. The notion of the seven sons symbolize inherited potential. It suggests that power is not random but pattern woven through generation. This idea reflects a broader human concern with the lineage and identity. Who we are is often shaped by where we come from, and the film dramatizes that through literalized folklore. The protagonist is not extraordinary because of a personal decision at the beginning of the story. He is extraordinary because of birth, yet the narrative pushes him to grow into that inherited significance. In abstract terms, the film explored the transformation of latent identity into active purposes. Another major theme is the cyclic nature of conflict. The rivalry between protector and antagonist feels initial, as though it has unfolded across time in repeated form. This suggests a world view in which good and evil are not temporary forces but enduring condition. The struggle between them is perpetual. The story does not frame evil as an isolated disruption, rather it presents it as an ever present shadow that must continually be confronted. This cyclic structure gives the narrative a mythical quality. It reassembles folk tales and archetypal legend in which each generation inherited unfinished battle from the one before. The message embedded within this framework leans toward responsibility. The film purposes that power carries obligation. Being chosen is not glamorous, it is burdensome. The protagonist's journey is not about discovering joy in his abilities but learning discipline, restraint, and courage. This theme resonates beyond fantasy. In abstract terms, it speaks to the human experience of growing into rules that demand sacrifice, where familial, societal, or moral. The story suggests that maturity comes not from escaping responsibility but from accepting it. Closely related is the theme of mentorship. The relationship between the season's protector and the apprentice embodies the transfer of knowledge across generations. Wisdom is portrayed as something learned through hardship. The mentor figure portrayed by Jeff Bridges represent experience shaped by loss and endurance. He is not idolized as flawless. Instead, he carries the weight of past failure. This dynamic reinforces the message that justice is imperfect yet essential. Growth requires both instruction and independence. The protagonist, portrayed by Julianna Moore, symbolizes restraint, power, and vigilance. In abstract terms, she represents chores without accountability. Her presence reinforces the story's moral axis. Power without discipline becomes destructive. This contrast sharpens the film central idea. It is not power itself that determines moral alignment, but how it is wielded. The hero's journey therefore becomes a lesson in self-control and ethical choice. There is also an undercurrent of ambiguity woven into the narrative. While the framework appears to divide good and evil clearly, the emotional and relational layer hint at complexity. Trust is not automatic and loyalty can be questioned. This introduces the idea that morality is not always simple. Even within a mythic structure, human relationship complicates straightforward binaries. In this sense, the film touches on the theme of internal conflict. The most significant battle are not only external confrontation but also struggle with identity. The story concept itself follows an archetypal path described in mythic storytelling tradition. The reluctant hero, the guiding mentor, the rising threat, and the climatic confrontation. Directed by Sergei Bodrov, the film framed this structure with seriousness rather than irony. It treats with mythic arc as timeless rather than playful. The abstract power of the film lies in its familiarity. It echoes narrative that have persisted across cultures, stories about chosen individual who must confront darkness to restore balance, and other abstract layer concern fear and courage. The world depicted in the film is unstable, filled with hidden danger. Fear becomes both obstacle and motivator. The protagonist must not eliminate fear but move through it. Courage, therefore, is defined not as absence of dread but as action despite it. This aligns with the broader thematic message. Growth occurs through confrontation with adversity. Ultimately, the core idea of the seven sons can be summarized as a journey from inherited potential to conscious responsibility within a world defined by cyclic struggle. It presents power as both gifted and burdened, mentorship as both guidance and test, and conflict as an enduring condition of existence. The message is not revolutionary, but it is archetypal. It speaks to the timeless human question: when faced with darkness, internal or external, will we accept the role we are called to play? In abstract language, the film tells a story about beginning, becoming brave, becoming accountable, becoming worthy of the legacy one carries. Its fantasy framework serves as metaphor for universal experience of transition and moral choice. Through myth and spectacle, it returned to a simple but enduring concept. Destiny may open the door, but character determine how one walk through it. At the heart of this movie lies a central conflict that is less about isolated battle and more about opposing philosophies of power, responsibility, and control. While the surface narrative presents a struggle between a protector and a destructive force, the deeper tension revolves around how power should be understood and wielded. The conflict is fundamentally moral before it is physical. One of the key moral dilemmas embedded in the story concern destiny versus autonomy. The protagonist is positioned within a framework of inherited significance. This creates an internal tension. Is one obligated to fulfill a role simply because it has been assigned by birth or tradition? The narrative suggests that the burden of expectation can feel as heavy as the external threat itself. The conflict, therefore, is not only between individuals but with identity. Accepting a distant role requires surrendering a certain degree of freedom, yet rejecting it at risk allow chaos to expand unchecked. Parallel to this is the moral tension surrounding the use of force. The world depicted in the film is unstable and dangerous, requiring guardian to confront destructive elements directly. But this necessity raise ethical question when combating darkness. How far can one go without becoming shaped by it? The protector figure portrayed by Jeff Bridges embodies this dilemma. He operates in a morally grey space where harsh decisions must sometimes be made for greater good. The tension lies in maintaining integrity while confronting corruption. The central conflict asks whether it is possible to oppose destructive power without absorbing some of its methods. The antagonist, portrayed by Julianna Moore, represents unrestrained will and vagueness. In abstract terms, she embodies power detached from accountability. Her presence intensifies the thematic struggle between discipline and chaos. The intensity is not only between the two characters but between two worldviews, one that sees power as something to be controlled and balanced, another that sees it as something to dominate with. This ideological opposition forms the foundation of the story's dramatic energy. Another layer of central conflict emerges through trust and uncertainty in a world defined by hidden danger and shifting loyalties. Certainty become fragile. The protagonist must navigate not only external threat but also relational ambiguities. Trust becomes a risk. The moral challenge here involved is discernment, determining who deserves loyalty and when doubt is justified. This uncertainty fuels ongoing tension as choices must often be made without complete information. The film's darker tone reinforces this instability, suggesting that clarity is rare and consequences are permanent. The generational dynamic also deepens the central conflict. The mentor figure, shaped by past losses and hardened experience, represent an older worldview built in caution and suspension. The younger protagonist carries potential but lack experience. Their dynamic introduces tension between tradition and renewal. Should the next generation replicate the rigid method of the previous one or redefine them? This question operates quietly beneath the larger struggle. It suggests that conflict is not only external but historical, shaped by what came before and influenced by how it will continue. Fear play a crucial role in sustaining the tension. The world is portrayed as volatile with destructive force always near resurgence. The constant sense of threat creates psychological pressure. The central conflict become a rest of resilience. Can courage persist in an environment where danger feels inevitable? Fear is not simply an obstacle to overcome, it is an ongoing condition that shapes every decision. The tension arises from the awareness that figure would not be minor, it would have irreversible consequences. Under the direction of Sergei Bodrov, the conflict is framed with gravity rather than spectacle alone. The tone reinforces the seriousness of what is at stake. The moral dilemmas are presenting as heavy burden rather than abstract debate. Responsibility is costly, action requires sacrifice. The narrative does not suggest that victory comes without loss or compromise. This weight intensifies the central tension, making the conflict feel enduring rather than episodic. Ultimately, the central conflict of Seven Sun revolve around balance. It is a struggle between restraint and indulgence, duty and desire, order and chaos. The moral dilemmas challenge struggle to define what kind of power they will embody. The external battle are manifestation of internal choices. The tension persists because the outcome depends not only on strength but on character. In abstract terms, the film explores whether individuals shaped by darkness can still choose light, where inherited roles can be transformed into conscious commitment, and whether power can exist without corruption. The conflict is sustained by uncertainty, ethical complexity, and the ever present possibility, and the line between protector and destroyer is thinner than it appears. Seventh Son explores a range of themes that extend beyond its surface level fantasy adventure framework. Beneath the witches, prophecies, and supernatural battles lie a story concerned with ethical responsibility, emotional maturation, and cultural reflection on power and fear. While the film presents these themes with a mythic culture, they resonate with broader human question about identity, morality, and social order. One of the central themes is the ethical responsibility of power. The story repeatedly raises the question: if someone possesses extraordinary ability, are they morally obligated to use it in service of others? Power in the film is neither neutral nor decorative. It carries consequence. The protagonist's journey reflects an ethical dilemma about acceptance of duty. Being born with potential does not automatically grant wisdom. The narrative suggests that the moral character must develop alongside capability. Without restraint and guidance, power risks becoming destructive. This ethical question is mirrored in the contrast between discipline, guardianship, and unrestrained vigilance. The protagonist, portrayed by Julianna Moore, represents power driven by emotion rather than accountability. Her actions symbolize what happens when resentment and anger dedicate leadership. The theme here is not simply good versus evil, but control versus chaos. The story asks where strength without empathy can even lead to stability. It implies that morality is not defined solely by ability but by intention and self regulation. Another major theme concerns mentorship and generational transfer. The dynamic between seasoned protector, played by Jeff Bridges, and the younger apprentice reflect the emotional arc of learning and growth. This relationship explores trust, discipline, and legacies. The mentor carries emotional scars from past experience, suggesting that wisdom often comes through hardship. The apprentice, in contrast, embodies possibility and uncertainty. Their interaction highlights a cultural theme about how knowledge and value are transmitted from one generation to the next. It also raises ethical questions about authority, but how control should a mentor exert and when must a certain being to think independently. The theme of identity is equally significant. The protagonist's status as the seven sons symbolize inherited identity, yet the story emphasizes that heritage alone does not define the future. The emotional arc revolves around transforming potential into action. This reflects a universal cultural topic: the tension between who we are told who we are and who we choose to become. The film presents identity as both given and constructed, while destiny set the stage, characters shape the outcome. Fear and prejudice also emerges as underlying theme. The world of the film is one in which supernatural beings are hunted and feared. The dynamic mirror culture pattern of suspicion toward what is perceived as different or dangerous. The story subtly engages with the ethical complexity of labeling entire group as threats. While the narrative positions certain forces as destructive, it also hints at the ambiguity of moral boundaries. This tension invites reflection on how societies define enemies and justify protective violence. Emotionally, the film explored courage not as fearlessness but as perseverance. The protagonist arc involves confronting self doubt and external threats simultaneously. Growth occurs not in moment of confront but in situation of uncertainty. This theme reinforces a cultural ideal of resilience. Strength is represented as endurance under pressure rather than dominance. The emotional experience promised by the narrative is one of transformation through diversity. Love and loyalty introduce another layer of thematic complexity. Romantic tension and relational trust challenge rigid moral framework. The protagonist must navigate emotional bonds that complicate his duty. These create an ethical question: should loyalty to individual ever override obligation to the greater good? The narrative does not present simple answer, but it uses emotional connection to deepen internal conflict. In doing so, it explores the culture value placed on relationship and personal integrity. The theme of cyclic conflict also play a significant role. The struggle between protector and antagonist feel rooted in history, suggesting that battle between order and chaos repeat cross generation. This reflects a broader culture narrative that societies must continuously guard against destructive forces. The film implies that peace is not permanent, it must be actively maintained. Under the direction of Sergei Bodrov, this theme is framed with seriousness rather than irony, reinforces its mythic weight. Ultimately, this film examines the intersection of power, identity, and moral choice. It explores ethical questions about responsibility and restraint, emotional arc of growth and mentorship, and cultural topic related to fear, prejudice, and generational continuity. Through its fantasy lens, the film reflects enduring human concern, how to confront darkness without becoming consumed by it, how to inherit a legacy without being imprisoned by it, and how to define morality in a world shaped by conflict. Though presented within a supernatural narrative, these themes echo familiar societal and psychological struggle. The movie may use myth and spectacle as its vehicle, but its thematic core centers on accountability, transformation, and the cost of maintaining balance in a fragile world. The emotional connection in Seven Son 2014 is built less on intricate plot mechanics and more on atmosphere, archetype, and universal theme. While the films operate within a fantasy framework of witches and proficiency, its emotional appeal sets on experience that viewer recognize in its own lives: fear of responsibility, the pressure of expectation, the struggle between kindness and independence, and desire to overcome inner doubt. The story attempts to connect by placing these relatable emotional tension inside a mythic world. Mood plays a central role in shaping that connection. The film establishes a sober, brooding atmosphere that invites viewers to feel tension almost immediately. The cold landscape, dim lighting, and serious tone signal that this is a world where safety is fragile. That mood creates a sense of emotional immersion rather than offering comfort or escapism. The film draws viewer into a state of alertness. The tension becomes shared as the character face looming threat. The audience experience anticipation and uncertainty alongside them. This darker mood also reinforces the theme of burden. The protagonist is not presenting as someone gleefully discovering magical power. Instead, he faces the weight of destiny. The emotional arc can resonate strongly with viewers who have experienced the pressure of expectation, whether from family, society, or personal ambition. The idea of being chosen is reframed as a responsibility rather than reward. This makes the character journey emotionally accessible even without supernatural ability. Many viewers understand what it feels like to be pushed into role and they may not feel ready to fulfill. The mentorship dynamic deepens this emotional connection. The relationship between experienced protector, portrayed by Jeff Bridges, and the young apprentice reflect a universal human experience, learning from someone older and wiser while simultaneously seeking independence. The mentor carries emotional scar and hardened cushion which give his guidance a sense of authenticity. Viewers may connect with either side of this dynamic, remembering their own teacher or recognizing themselves in the process of growing beyond instruction. This generational tension adds emotional texture to the story. Themes of courage and self belief further shape the viewer experience. The protagonist's growth is less about mastering spell and more about developing confidence. The emotional journey centers on overcoming fear and accepting uncertainty and choosing to act despite doubt. These are the experiences that transcend genre. The film invites viewers to reflect on their own moment of hesitation and resolve. The connection emerges not from spectacle but from identification with vulnerability. At the same time, the protagonist, portrayed by Julianna Moore, adds emotional intensity through control menace. Her presence creates a sustained feeling of threat that heightens engagement. Emotional investment often depends on the strength of opposition. When danger feels powerful and personal, the stakes feel real. This dynamic encourages viewers to root for resilience and perseverance. Under the direction of Sergei Bodrov, the emotional tone remains serious and grounded. The film avoids excessive humor, which reinforces the gravity of the situation. This stylistic choice may limit light-hearted emotional release, but it strengthens the consistency of the mood. Viewers are not distracted by tonal shift. Instead, they remain with the high emotional register of tension and urgency. For fan of darker fantasy, this sustained mood enhances immersion. Another aspect of emotional connection comes from the theme of trust. The story introduces uncertainty about loyalty and intention, which reflect real world relational dilemmas. Trust requires vulnerability, and vulnerability carries risk. By placing character in situation where alliances are tested, the film taps into familiar emotional territory. We will recognize the fear of betrayal and the hope for loyalty even within a fantastical setting. The viewer's experience is therefore shaped by a combination of tension, identification, and thematic familiarity. While the visual effect provides spectacle, the emotional engagement depends on archetypal struggle. Youth stepping into adulthood, mentor confronting past failures, and individual facing moral choices. The mood reinforces these themes, creating a consistent emotional landscape that feels serious and weighty. Ultimately, the emotional connection of this movie lies in its portrayal of becoming brave, becoming responsible, becoming capable of standing against fear. The story invites viewers to see themselves in that process, even if the external circumstances are extraordinary. Through mood, theme, and character dynamic, the film seeks to transform myth into metaphor, allowing audience to experience the raw emotional journey reflected within a dark and magical world. When analyzing the character of this film from a viewer's perspective, it becomes clear that the film leans strongly on classic fantasy archetype. However, which give these archetype weight are specific character who embody them. Tom Ward, Master Georgia, and Mother Malkin each represent a different philosophical emotional force within the story. Starting with Tom Ward, he is the central protagonist and clearly fit the reluctant chosen one archetype. As a seventh son of a seventh son, he is born into a legacy he did not ask for. Tom's personality traits include curiosity, hesitation, emotional openness, and emerging courage. At the beginning of this journey, he feels inexperienced and uncertain. He is not naturally confident or battle hardened. This vulnerability makes him relatable, particularly for younger audience. Now, from a reviewer's standpoint, Tom's character arc revolves around growth. His internal conflict is not simply about defeating evil, but about accepting responsibility. He must decide whether he will live passively or step into the role destiny has prepared for him. That transition from doubt to determination is the emotional spine of his character. However, while the framework of his arc is strong, the script sometimes prioritizes action sequence over deeper introspection. As a result, Tom functions effectively as a symbolic hero through his emotional layer not always fully explored. In contrast, Master Gregory, portrayed by Jeff Bridges, represents the hardened mentor archetype. George Gregory is experienced, disciplined, emotionally grounded. He has spent years fighting dark forces, and that history has left him wary and cautious. His personality blends stern authority with subtle vulnerability. He is not warm or openly expressive, but there are glimpses of regret and fatigue beneath his toughness. As a reviewer, I would argue that Master Georgia is one of the film's most compelling characters. His presence adds gravitas to the narrative. He embodies the cost of lifelong conflict. Where Tom represents potential, Gregory represents consequence. Their dynamic create tension between youth and experience. Gregory's strict method reflect a worldwide shaped by loss, while Tom's optimism hits at renewal. This generational contrast strengthens the emotional dimension of the story. Then there is Mother Malkin, the primary antagonist, portrayed by Julianna Moore. She embodied the dark, sorceress archetype, but her performance adds nose. Malkin is powerful, calculating, and driven by vengeance. His personality trait include intensity, pride, and strategic patience. She does not act impulsively, she moves with purpose and control. For her reviewers' perspective, Mother Malkin effectiveness lies in her presence. She feels formidable and emotionally invested in the conflict. Rather than being evil for spectacle alone, she radiates personal graviness. This gives her motivational emotional texture even if the script does not deeply unpack her backstory. A fantasy film often depends on the strength of its villain, and Moore's portrayal elevates what might otherwise have been a standard antagonist role. Another key character worth mentioning is Alliance, who introduce emotional complexity with Tom's journey. She exists in a morally ambiguous space, challenging near clear division between good and evil. Alice represents temptation, trust, and possibility of the understanding across enemy line. Her presence adds relational tension and forces Tom to confront emotional choices alongside physical battle. Under the direction of Sergei Bodrov, the performance maintains a serious and grounded tone. The characters are treated with mythic weight rather than exaggerated fantasy of theatrics. This approach supports the darker mood of the film, even if it occasionally limits opportunities for warmth or humor. Overall, Tom Ward, Master Gregory, and Mother Malkin from the emotional and philosophical core of the Seven Son. Tom's stem symbolize growth and inherited destiny. Gregory represents discipline shaped by experience. Malkin's embodies unrestrained power fueled by resentment, while the character follow recognizable archetype. Their performance and dynamic provide emotional grounded to sustain the filmatic ambition. The acting performance in Seven Son 2014 carry much of the film emotional weight in a story built on archetype and large scale fantasy spectacle. The success of the narrative depends heavily on whether the actor can ground the mythic framework in something human, while the screenplay leans toward familiar structure. The performance attempt to inject personality, tension, and emotional texture into the world. Starting within the lead actor Ben Barnes as Tom Ward deliver a performance rooted in vulnerability. Barnes approaches the role with a sense of quiet uncertainty which fits the character emotional arc. Tom is not introduced as a fearless hero. He is unsure, occasionally hesitant, and visibly overwhelmed by the expectation placed upon him. Barons capture that internal struggle with subtitle expression rather than dramatic outburst. Emotionally, his portrayal centers on growth. As the story progresses, his posture, tone, and confidence shift in small but noticeable way. While the script may not provide extensive introspective dialogue, Baron manages to suggest internal conflict through restrained performance choices. However, as a viewer, it's fair to say that his performance occasionally feel overshadowed by the larger personalities around him. In a fantasy film driven by spectre and commanding co-star, subtitling can sometimes fade into the background. Still, Baron maintains sincerity throughout, which help anchor the emotional core of the film. In contrast, Jeff Bridges as Master Gregory brings a commanding presence that immediately draws attention. Bridges plays the seasoned monster hunter with gravelly intensity and world awareness. His vocal choices and physical mannerism give the character a rugged authenticity. Emotionally, his performance suggests a man burdened by past battle and lingering regret. There is a heaviness in the way he moves and speaks, reinforcing the idea that his character has sacrificed much over the year. Bridges' portrayal add gravitas to the film. Even when the gravity leans toward exposition, he delivers it with conviction. His stern mentorship style contrasts sharply with Tom's youthfulness, creating emotional tension between experience and inexperience at times. His performance borders on stylized eccentricity, but it remains consistent with the film's darker tone. Then there is a Julianna Moore as Mother Malkin, who arguably delivers one of the most emotionally compelling performances in the film. Moore approaches the antagonist with control, menace rather than exaggerated villainy. Her expression are deliberate, her movement measured. She radiates authority and suppressed fury. making the character feel dangerous without relying on theoretics. Emotionally, she embodies resentment and pride, giving the villain dimension beyond surface level evil. Mora's presence elevates the stakes. Her calm intensity makes the threat feel personal rather than abstract. Among the supporting cast, Alicia Vikander as Alice provides emotional softness and ambiguity. Vikander brings warmth and subtlety to her role, which balances the otherwise stern atmosphere of the film. Her chemistry with Ben Barnes adds a layer of emotional tension. Their interaction introduces moment of vulnerability and uncertainty that contrasts with the broader action sequence. Emotionally, she represents both comfort and complication, and Vikrant play the duality with understand strength. In terms of chemistry, the most dynamic relationship is between Bridges and Barons. Their mentor apprentice dynamic feel believable because of the emotional contrast in their performance. Bridges hardened demeanor meets Baron's openness, creating friction that derive character development. While the script does not deeply explore every emotional nose, their exchange carry an undercurrent of respect gradually forming through conflict. The chemistry between Baron and Vikrant feels gentler and more tentative, which suits the tone of uncertainty surrounding their relationship. Meanwhile, Morey's interaction with the rest of the cast maintain a playable tension. Her presence shifts the emotional atmosphere of every scene she enters. Overall, the acting performance in this film are one of the stronger elements. The lead actor provides sincerity and gravitas, while the supporting cast add emotional texture and contrast. Even when the story leans heavily on visual spectacle, the performances ensure that the film retains a human core. The emotional resonance may not always reach its full potential, but the cast's commitment gives the fantasy world credibility and weight. In a fantasy film like this, realism is not about whether witches, spirits, or supernatural warriors exist in our world. Instead, realism is measured by emotional truth, character motivation, and how conveniently the world film built its internal universe. Directed by Sergei Bodrov and based on the novel by Joseph Delaney, the movie attempts to ground its magical world in human emotion, recognizable struggle. The question is not whether the creatures are believable, but whether the people facing them feel real. At the center of the story is Storm, what play by Ben Barron. Storm character arc follows the classic coming of age structure, a young man discovering hidden strength and stepping into responsibility. In terms of character development, Tom is presented as inexperienced, uncertain, and at times impulsive. The film positions him as an apprentice, learning not just skill but moral judgment. His growth is meant to feel gradual. He begins unsure of himself and slowly develops confidence. However, the depth of that development depends largely on how much the audience connect to his internal struggle. While the film show his progression through action and training, it sometimes rushes emotional transition which slightly reduce the sense of psychological realism. Master Gregory, portrayed by Jeff Bridges, bring a different kind of depth. Gregory is the hardened mentor archetype, drawn by years of battle, burdened by regret, and grounded in his emotion. Bridges give the character texture through tone and physicality. His gravelly wise and weary posture suggests a man who has seen too much loss. His performance adds emotional weight to the fantasy setting. Georgia realism does not come from detailed backstory exposition but from a subtitle implication that his past has shaped his present cynicism. He feels like a man reacting to trauma rather than simply fulfilling a role in the plot. On the opposing side, Mother Malkin, played by Julianna Moore, represents power and ambition. Villain in fantasy often risk becoming exaggerated or one-dimensional, but Moore approaches the role with control intensity. There is elegance in her menace, even though her current character operates in a heightened supernatural realm. Her motivation, desire for dominance, resentment, and survival are emotionally recognizable. The realism of her character lies in how grounded those desires feel, even within an extravagant setting. Believability in Seventh Son also depends on emotional range. The film moves between dark, ominous sequence and lighter moments of humor or mentorship. For realism to work, these tonal shifts must feel supernatural. At times, the transition can feel abrupt, which slightly disrupt immersion. Yet, when the film slows down and allows character to express doubt, fear, or vulnerability, it becomes more convincing. Small exchanges, moments of hesitation, or quiet reflection add more depth than large-scale action scenes. Character relationships are another important measure of depth. The dynamic between Tom and Gregory function as a traditional teacher-student bond built on tension, discipline, and reluctant respect. While their connection is clear, it could benefit from more layered emotional conservation. Similarly, Tom's emotional involvement with the mysterious ally suggests complexity, but the film gives limited time to explore that relationship psychological notes. As a result, some emotional beats feel more symbolic than deeply lived in. Ultimately, the realism of this film lies not in its creature or spells but in how conveniently its character wrestle with responsibility, fear, and identity. The performance, particularly from Bridges and Moray, add gravitas to a world filled with spectre, while the film sometimes prioritizes visual scale over intimate character study. It still achieves moment of authenticity through expressive acting and familiar emotional struggle. In fantasy built on myth, realism become less about fact and more about feeling. But when the character resonate, even a world of magic can feel human. The production budget of this movie reflects the financial scale typically associated with mid to large fantasy epic of the nearly 2010s, directed by Sergei Bodrov and distributed by Universal Pictures. The film reportedly operated with an estimated cost range of approximately $95 million to $110 million. This places it in a significant but not top tier blockbuster bracket. While it does not reach the extreme financial level of franchise driven fantasy film, it still represents the substantial investment, particularly for a story that was not yet an established cinematic series. A large portion of this budget would have been allocated to visual effect. Fantasy film depends heavily on CGI to create supernatural creatures, magical environment, and large-scale action sequence. Seventh Son features shape-shifting witches, mythical beasts, and elaborate battle scenes, all of which require advanced digital rendering. Visual effect team, post-production editing, and compositing processes typically consume a significant percentage of such budget, often between 25% and 40% in comparable production. The film emphasis on atmospheric landscape and creature transformation suggests that a considerable amount of funding was directed toward their technical department. to a key component of the budget involve production design and costuming. Fantasy world demand details, set construction, historical style, wardrobe, armor and prop to create believable immersion. Unlike contemporary drama which can rely on modern setting, period inspired fantasy film require custom built environment or extensive location modification. The creation of medieval style villages, dark fortresses, and mystical interior likely required both practical set building and digital enhancement. Costume design alone can represent millions of dollars in a film of this scale, particularly when principal character undergo multiple wardrobe changes reflecting narrative progression. Cast salaries also form a substantial part of the financial equation. The presence of established actors such as Jeff Bridges and Julianna Moore would have influence above the line cost. Experience award recognized performer often command multi-million dollar compensation packages even if their individual salaries did not match those seen in major franchise installment. They would still represent a significant percentage of the film total cost. Supporting cast member and contractual obligation further add to payroll expenses, marketing and distribution expenses, while technically separate from the production budget itself, may also be considered when evaluating overall financial exposure. From a global release under a major studio, promotional campaigns can approach $30 million to $50 million depending on international strategy. Although these costs are not always included in reported production figure, they directly affect profitability analysis and return on investment. When comparing Seven Son to similar fantasy film, it sits in a competitive range. For instance, The Golden Compass reportedly had a production budget of around $180 million, significantly higher to extensive CGI and largely in ensemble casting. Meanwhile, Hazel and Gabriel Witch Hunter operated at roughly $50 million to $60 million, placing it at a lower financial tier. Seven Souls fall between these example, ambitious in scale but not reaching an extraordinary level of major franchise standpoint. From an analytical standpoint, the budget reflects confidence in the fantasy genre. During that era, studios were actively seeking new franchise to follow the success of high grossing properties earlier in the decade. Investing close to $100 million suggests expectation of international appeal and potential sequel development. However, mid-range fantasy budget also carries higher risk, particularly when the intellectual property does not yet have widespread mainstream recognition. Overall, the production budget of the Seven Son demonstrate a careful balance but ambitious financial strategy. Resources appear to have been distributed across visual effect, production design, star talent, technical craftsmanship. While not at the extreme upper end of fantasy filmmaking cost, the investment position the film firmly within the blockbuster category, reflecting both the creative demand of the genre and commercial aspiration behind its release. The domestic box office performance of The Seventh Son in the United States provide important context for understanding its overall reception. Release in North America in early 2015 after multiple delays, the film entered a competitive market environment. Domestically, it earned approximately $17 million during its theatrical run, a modest figure compared to its reported production budget of around $95 million to $110 million. From an analytical standpoint, the result positioned the film well below expectation for a large-scale fantasy release. The timing of its domestic release play a role in shaping audience turnout. Earlier release in the US market often face a unique dynamic, January and February can offer less direct blockbuster competition compared to summer. There are also traditionally slower period for fantasy epics. Major fantasy franchises applicable aim for holiday seasons or peak summer windows where younger demographics are more available. By contrast, Seven Sun enter theater without the seasonal advantage that often benefit large spectral driven films. Audience trend in North America during the mid 2010s also lean heavily toward established franchise. Viewers show strong loyalty to recognizable cinematic universe and sequel driven properties. And now we talk about the original or lesser known fantasy adaptation face higher barriers to entry unless supported by strong critical buzz or pre-existing fan base compared to globally recognized brand. Seventh Son did not carry the same culture familiarity among mainstream American audience, which may have influenced domestic turn out. When examining opening weekend performances, the film's debut reflected moderate curiosity but limited momentum. It did not generate the kind of front loaded surge typically associated with highly anticipated genre entries. Word of mouth and critical response also play a significant role in domestic sustainability. In the US market, especially reviews and early audience reaction can heavily influence second weekend draw. Films that fail to generate strong enthusiasm often experience deep declines after opening, limiting overall domestic total. In comparison to similar fantasy action title, the domestic earnings of Seven Sons appear relatively modest. For example, Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunter earned over $50 million domestically despite operating with a lower production budget. Meanwhile, the Golden Compass generated nearly $70 million in North America, even though it ultimately relied more heavily on international market for profitability. These comparisons highlighting how Seven Son underperformed within its genre category domestically. Regional viewing habit in the United States also reveal important demographic consideration. Fantasy film traditionally attract younger audience, particularly teenagers and young adults. However, domestic success in this genre often depend on strong crossover appeal to families and older viewers without broad four-quadrant engagement, meaning appeal across gender and age group. A fantasy film can struggle to reach blockbuster level domestic returns. Seven Son appeared to attract genre fans but did not fully break into mainstream family audience at scale. Marketing intensity and audience perception further influence domestic performance in North America. Promotional campaign must create urgency and event level anticipation. When marketing emphasizes visual spectacle without clearly communicating character driven stake, casual viewer may perceive the film as interchangeable with other fantasy offering. In a crowded media environment, differentiation become critical. Ultimately, the domestic box office of Seven Son reflect the challenges faced by mid-budget fantasy film in the US market during that period. While its pure theatrical presence and rich core genre enthusiastic, its earning did not align with the financial expectation typically associated with nearly $100 million production. The domestic performance therefore become a central factor in shaping industry perception of the film's commercial outcome, particularly when measured against genre peers and evolving audience trend in North America. The international box office performance of The Seventh Son presents a noticeably different picture from its domestic result. When the films underperformed in North America, its overseas earnings were significantly stronger. Internationally, the film generated approximately $93 million, bringing its worldwide total to around $110 million. This means the majority of its revenue came from market outside the United States, highlighting the increasing importance of global audience for large-scale fantasy production. One of the most significant contributing region was China. During the mid 2010s, the Chinese box office was expanding rapidly, and Hollywood fantasy film often perform well there due to their visual spectacle and action-driven storytelling. Seven Son benefited from this trend, earning a substantial portion of its international total from the Chinese market. Spectral heavy film with clear good versus evil narrative tend to translate effectively across language and culture boundaries, especially when dialogue complexity is can due to visual storytelling. In this respect, the film emphasis on magical battle and creature design like enhance its accessibility in non-English speaking territory. Other international regions, including part of Europe and Asia, also contributed to the overall revenue. Fantasy as a genre traditionally perform consistently in European market, where audience have long standing interest in medieval folklore and myth based storytelling. While the film did not become a breakout hit in these territories, it demonstrated steadier performance compared to its US run. This suggests that audience reception abroad may have been more respective to its tone and visual style. Market reception internationally offered differed from domestic critical trend. In some overseas territories, star recognition can be a strong draw regardless of review score. The presence of well-known actors such as Jeff Bridges and Julianna Moore may have been frightened strengthened marketing campaign approach. International distributors frequently highlight recognizable faces in promotional material to attract audience who associate Hollywood actor with production quality and prestige. Marketing impact play a crucial role in international success. Studios often adjust promotional strategies regionally, emphasizing different aspects of a film depending on local audience preferences. In action oriented market, campaigns often may focus heavily on battle sequence and visual effect. In other, they might emphasize the fantasy, mythology, or romantic subplot. This tailored approach can help maximize turnout even if domestic marketing struggle to generate broad enthusiasm. However, while international earnings were stronger than domestic numbers, they will still moderate relative to the film reported production budget. Large scale fantasy film typically require worldwide total significantly exceeding production cost in order to be considered fully profitable, specifically when marketing expenses are included. Although international market help often soften the financial impact, the film global performance did not reach the level typically associated with franchise launching success. From an industrial perspective, the international box office of The Seventh Son demonstrated the shifting balance of power in global cinema. By the mid 2010, overseas revenue had become essential for recouping high production investment. Films that struggled domestically could still remain financially viable through strong international appeal. It served as an example of this dynamic. While North America performance was limited, international audience, particularly in Asia, play a crucial role in sustaining its worldwide total. Overall, the film's international box office highlighted the growing importance of global market in determining a fantasy film commercial strategy. The worldwide gross of Seven Sun reached approximately $110 million, combining both domestic and international earning. From a surface level perspective, that number may appear substantial. However, in film economy, gross revenue alone does not determine profitability. To understand whether a film break even, it is necessary to examine total production, marketing expense, distribution arrangement, and how box office revenue is divided between studios and theater. The film reported production budget range between 95 million and 110 million dollars. This figure covered the direct cost of making the movie: cast salary, crew wages, and visual effects, set construction, costume, and post production. However, production budget do not include global marketing and promotional expense for a fantasy film release worldwide by major studio. Marketing cost can easily range from $30 million to $50 million or more. When promotional spending is combined with production cost, total investment may rise to approximately $130 to $160 million. Break-even analysis in the film industry follows a specific financial structure. Studios do not retain 100% of box office earning. Theaters typically keep a significant portion of ticket sale, often around 40 to 50% domestically, and sometimes can an even larger share internationally depending on territory. This means that if a film grosses $110 million worldwide, the actual revenue turned to the studio could be considerably lower, potentially closer to 55 to $65 million after exhibitor split. Additionally, distribution costs vary by region. International market often involve local distribution partner, dubbing or subtitling expenses, promotional tour and territory specific advertising campaign. In some countries, revenue sharing agreement reduce the studio's final return even further. For example, certain major international markets operate under stricter revenue division rules that limit foreign studios' net share. As a result, long international box office performance does not always translate promotionally into studio profit. Global audience reach remain an important factor in assessing financial performance. While The Seventh Son underperformed in North America, its stronger reception in overseas territory, particularly Asian market, helped offset domestic losses. From a financial analysis standpoint, this film worldwide gross suggests it likely did not reach traditional theoretical break-even threshold. While global audience provide moderate support, the total revenue appear insufficient to fully recover combined production and marketing investment during its initial release cycle. The film therefore represents a case where international earnings softened the impact of domestic underperformance but were not strong enough to establish long-term franchise viability. Break-even analysis involve more than matching production budget to worldwide growth. It requires evaluating revenue split, distribution cost, promotional spending, and ancillary income stream. When these factors are considered collectively, Seventh Son global earning illustrate the economic risk associated with mid to high budget fantasy filmmaking into a competitive international marketplace. A profitability analysis of Seventh Son required a careful comparison between total revenue and total cost rather than simply looking at worldwide gross figure. On paper, the film earned approximately $110 million globally. However, when measured against its estimated production budget reported between $95 million and $110 million, the financial picture becomes more complicated. Production costs alone nearly equal the total theoretical revenue and does not yet count for marketing and distribution expenses. When evaluating revenue versus cost, industry analysts typically apply a multiple to estimate break-even threshold because theater retain a significant portion of ticket sale, often around half domestically and slightly more internationally. The studio does not receive the full box office total. If Seventh Son gross $110 million worldwide, the studio share may have been closer to $55 to $65 million after the exhibitor split. That amount would be well below the production cost even before advertising expenses are considered. Marketing costs for a globally released fantasy films are substantial. Promotional campaigns including television advertising and international trailers, press towards digital marketing and theatrical placement. For a film of this scale, marketing likely added $30 to $50 million or more to the overall investment. When combining production and marketing, the total financial expenditure may have reached $130 to $160 million. Under these conditions, the film would have required worldwide gross significantly higher than $200 million to reach the theoretical break-even territory. Now we talk about the available figure. It did not reach that benchmark. Now, in conclusion, based on revenue versus cost comparison, ancillary income potential, and estimated ROI, Seventh Son was likely not theoretically profitable in traditional terms. While international market and secondary revenue stream may have softened financial losses, the film total earning appear insufficient to fully offset combined production and marketing expenditure. As a result, it stands as an example of the financial risk inherent in mind to the high budget fantasy filmmaking without established franchise security. Audience reaction to Seventh Son were mixed and vary noticeably across different demographics. The film primarily attracted fantasy enthusiasts, younger viewer, and audience interested in supernatural action. However, broader mainstream engagement appeared more limited, particularly in North America. Among younger demographics, especially teenagers and young adults, the movie generated moderate curiosity. Viewer in this group are typically drawn to magical world, dark mythology, and coming of age narrative. The central premise of a young apprentice is learning to battle supernatural force, aligning with familiar genre formulas that resonate with this audience. For some viewers, the visual spectacle and creature design provided enough entertainment value to justify the theatrical experience. Fast-paced action sequence and clear moral conflict help maintain engagement for those primarily seeking escapist entertainment. Older audience and critics tended to respond more cautiously. Mature viewers often look for layered narrative and complex character motivation, particularly when experienced actors are involved. Although performance from established cast drew attention, some viewers felt the script did not fully utilize that talent available. This prescription influenced word of mouth engagement, which play a critical role in sustaining audience turnout beyond opening weekend. International engagement pattern appear somewhat stranger in certain markets, particularly when large-scale fantasy spectacles are popular. Regardless of critical reception in some region, audience reaction focus more entertainment value on action sequence than narrative depth. Visual-driven storytelling can transcend language barrier, making engagement less dependent on dialogue-heavy character development. Social media engagement and online rating reflecting this overall mixed response. The film did not generate significant fan-driven momentum or viral enthusiasm. Instead, reaction tended to luster around modern satisfaction. We were describing it as a watchable or entertaining enough rather than exception. This level of engagement often indicate a film that meet basic genre expectation without exceeding them. Ultimately, Seven Sons succeed visually more than emotionally. It offers atmospheric fantasy, solid performance, and respectable production quality, but it stopped short of becoming memorable. Its strength lies in craftsmanship and star pieces, while its weakness stem from predictable storytelling and limited thematic exploration. As a standalone fantasy film, it is competently made and occasionally engaging, yet it lacks the narrative boldness needed to stand out within a crowded genre landscape. It is a film that will appeal strongly to a specific type of viewer while leaving other less satisfied. Understanding who should watch it depends largely on genre preferences, age group, and expectation about storytelling depth versus visual spectacle. First, this movie is best suited for fantasy action fan who enjoy dark folklore, magical battle, and medieval style setting. If you are someone who appreciates atmospheric world filled with witches, warrior, curses, and supernatural creature, the film offers consistent visual engagement. People who prioritize mood, creature design, and large-scale confrontation over integrated storytelling will likely find it entertainment. The film leans heavily into its fantasy identity, embracing dramatic landscape, stylized costume, and mystical lore. For audience who watch fantasy primarily for escapism, this is a comfortable fit. Teenager and young adult are arguably the core target audience. The coming of age structure center around a young apprentice discovering his purpose, align closely with him that resonate with viewers in their mid-teens to early 20s. The emotional arc focuses on growth, courage, and identity, universal ideas that younger viewers often connect with. Additionally, the pacing and action oriented structure keep the narrative accessible. While there are darker elements, the film does not become overwhelming, intense, or psychologically heavy, making it appropriate for older teens. Fan of straightforward heroic journey will also find value here. The film follows familiar fantasy archetype: the seasoned mentor, the inexperienced but destined hero, and the powerful antagonist. For favor who enjoy classic good versus evil framework, without excessive complexity. This familiarity can feel satisfying rather than repetitive. The emotional resonance comes from archetypal storytelling than from deep philosophical exploration. However, the movie may not satisfy viewer seeking layer world building or profound thematic depth. If you prefer fantasy film that explore political intrigue, moral ambiguity, or intricate mythology, this story may feel too dry. The theme of destiny and moral choice are present, but they are handled in a relatively conventional manner. Viewers who value unpredictable narrative twist or complex character psychology may find the emotional experience somewhat surface level. Older audience who prioritize character driven formula over spectacle may also feel underwhelmed. While the cast deliver committed performance, the script does not always provide the nose dialogue or slow burn emotional development that mature viewers sometimes expect. Those looking for intense emotional interception or deeply philosophical theme may find the film more visually engaging than emotionally transformative. Film with younger children should approach with caution, although not excessively graphic. The darker tone, supernatural creature, and better battle sequence may be too intense for very young viewer. It is best suited for older teens rather than children under 12, particularly those sensitive to dark fantasy imagery. In terms of emotional resonance, Seven Son often moderate impact rather than profound reflection. It aimed to entertain, to immerse viewer in a moody supernatural world, and to deliver a classic hero journey. It does not aim to challenge the audience intellectually or emotionally in extreme way. Therefore, viewers seeking light to moderate emotional engagement within a fantasy framework will likely appreciate it more than those seeking a deeply moving cinematic experience. In summary, watch this film if you enjoy fantasy, action, atmospheric setting, and traditionally heroic narrative, especially if you are a teenager or young adult drawn to coming of age theme. You may want to skip if you are a prefer highly original storytelling, complex emotional art, or groundbreaking genre innovation. It is Beck's experience as a visually polished, straightforward fantasy adventure rather than a transformatic cinematic milestone.